Hey everybody, this is Steli Efti.
And Mary Hartberg.
And this is the Remote Culture Podcast. Today, we want to talk about screening and engaging for remote fit when you are interviewing people for a new role or role in your company. So we are hiring tons of people across many different functions and positions within the company. Obviously, I think the number one thing that we look for is we're trying to gauge for culture fit. Like, are these people going to be successful parts of our culture, enriching our culture? Do they really fit our culture? That's incredibly important to us. Then there's obviously a component that's about the job, right? Do they have the skills, the experience to do the work that we need them to do at the level that we expect from them? But then there's also another area that in the early days we didn't consider at all, which is are they for lack of a better term, a remote fit employee or a remote fit candidate? Like, are we convinced that this person can do exceptional well in a remote company, in a remote kind of environment? Let's talk a little bit about that. Some of the things we do to try to gauge that, some of the things we're looking for, some of the tests we figured out, some of the mistakes that we've done. If you think about that, and if you think about us in the early days especially, what are some of the early mistakes we made there that instantly pop up in your mind?
Yeah, so I would say when you're doing an application to potentially join Close, one of the questions that we straight up ask in general questions is, what is your experience working remotely? And we never used to ask that. We would just say it's a nice to have, or we weren't even really conscious, I think, about that because it was a progression of how we became remote. But we have recognized like how important this actually is. Working in a remote space is very different than working in an office. When you go in, there's different motivators, there's different factors, there's so many different variables to know if you're going to thrive in that environment. And so one of the things we do is we ask, and that's what we're trying to gauge for is, will you thrive? Will you be happy? Will you be productive in this environment? And so now we ask that in the application question. The best indicator of this is if you've done it before. So if you have years of experience working remotely where you are working in a fully distributed team, that's wonderful. There's also people who have maybe just been freelance working by themselves, but there's all different kind of ways. Maybe they haven't been working asynchronously. Maybe they've been working 2 days remote with a company. So we just kind of want to know where you at with that, and kind of what your experience has been, because then I'll hop on a culture call and I'll dive into that more, where I'm very forward about, what do you think this actually looks like for you? And explaining how we work asynchronously, how we communicate and collaborate asynchronously, and really getting people to tell me what they think this looks like if they haven't done it before. One of the questions that we now ask is, one of our values is discipline equals freedom. So in that culture call, I'll ask, what outside of work, where do you find that you display a good amount of discipline and commitment in your life? And those are always very illuminating answers. And so we can try to gauge, like, if you have strong commitments outside of work, usually it's a physical sort of commitment that you're doing, like going to the gym or swimming or something. Maybe it's a diet, maybe it's your family, you've got a dog that you care to. We've noticed that people who thrive in the remote space and are successful here tend to be very committed outside of work as well to a schedule. That just seems to be something that correlates well with knowing they're going to be successful in the remote space.
Yeah, I think in the early days, we didn't think about at all to like rank somebody with remote experience above somebody that didn't. Like, we just didn't think that was a big thing. And I think that, so that was a mistake. And then the other mistake that we were doing is that when somebody was telling us, when we would ask people, how come that you decided to apply for this job? And they told us, well, I decided I want to do remote for a while. I want to try out the remote lifestyle. So I went to this remote job board site and I just applied to a bunch of companies. To us,
Yeah.
that's kind of made sense. We're like, oh yeah, this is a smart person doing well in life and now chosen the better path of remote, and we are going to be the one that's changing this person's life. Today, we realize that that's actually kind of a bad reason. Like being, as a company, the guinea pig for this person trying out remote, it can work. Don't misunderstand me. And we will engage in that conversation and try to figure out how mature and thoughtful has this person been in choosing that they want to change their life to that kind of a work setup. But this, this is going to be my second job ever. I'm young. I'm still kind of aimlessly going through life. And the idea of traveling and working sounds fun to me. So hence, I'm looking for remote jobs. That poses a ton of risks to the business in a kind of very uneven way, where we have learned and decided that we don't want to be the guinea pig where you can play remote and see if this works, or you can try these things that you've never done before, like traveling for 6 months while working without knowing how difficult it is to travel to new places and have good Wi-Fi and good work setups and a rhythm and time zones and all that. Like that needs incredible planning and discipline. And we don't want to be the company where you experiment with this for a couple of months and then figure out that it doesn't work for you, because that is just too expensive of a cost for us. And that's something that we didn't even consider earlier. So we want people that want to work for us for very strong reasons, and not just, I want to do remote, so I just apply to every remote company to experience this kind of new setup in my life. The
Yeah.
other thing that I'll say, go ahead.
I was going to say, a way to say that what now we see is we want you to be exceptional in your work, and that remote is this plus about how our company operates and it works well with your lifestyle. And versus like you were looking for a remote job and you're like, oh, this would fit. I guess I could do this. We definitely want you to be exceptional in your job first.
Yeah. So there's a few things that we're looking for to kind of gauge beyond, like, have they had experience, or do they have very good reasons for it? I mean, one thing in a remote company is being exceptional as a communicator, right? And a lot of the communication will happen asynchronously. A lot of it will be in writing. So we try in the take-home assignments that we do in the overall interviewing process to see how effective is this person as a communicator? How good are they as a writer? Like if they are terrible in communicating their ideas in writing, if they're very slow in their sloppy in their follow-up or in their responsiveness, if they never have good Wi-Fi, they never can stream video when we have video conferencing interactions with them, if they have a ton of typos and overall don't seem to be that thoughtful in the take-homes they send over, all these things collectively create a picture that this person is not going to be as successful in a remote environment, because the tools of the trade and the way that this company functions in terms of how we communicate and collaborate are not things where this person seems to be excelling at, right? Any things that come to mind in the way that we try to use writing, communication style, and all that to gauge somebody's fit for remote?
Yeah, that's what we're looking at when we're reviewing applications. Definitely spelling and grammar, and how you're responding to those questions that we ask within the application, because we actually see the application as your first interview. So if you've been negligent about not answering those questions, that's just oftentimes it'll say, ask me in the interview or something like this. We're a very small team, so that's why we have put those questions in place to help us get you in front of the hiring manager. And so we take those questions very seriously. We know you invest a lot of time in them. And so we invest a lot of time in reading through all of the responses. And so if those are poorly written or poorly communicated, that's a pretty good indicator that this isn't going to be a good fit. And then once you'd be in the interview process, the things like take home, if how you're communicating to myself or the hiring manager during that time is also very insightful, where I can tell when we give instructions on something, if there's a lot of questions that are coming back that are it makes it clear that maybe you haven't read something properly. So we're just mindful about adding up all of these communication styles. Yeah, that's what we're looking for.
The other thing that you mentioned is the kind of discipline equals freedom. One
Mhm.
way that we've been talking about this is maturity. Like, we
Yeah.
know that to work successfully remotely, you have to be a disciplined human being. You have to take charge of your life. You have to
Mhm.
design your workspace, your work cadence,
Mhm.
your work habits, because there is not some like the beautiful thing about like working at a physical company that has like an office is that a lot of this is force functioned on you. Like, work starts at a given time in the office, so you have to like leave your house. Usually you have to shower, brush your teeth, right? You have
Yeah.
to make it there on time. You walk into a different building than your house, so now in your mind you're like, oh, now is work time, I'm thinking about work things. You sit at a desk that's somewhere in the room, and somebody hopefully thought about where that is. Maybe you're part of all the desks in your department and team. There's a time when there's lunch, there's a place to go to have lunch, there's a break time. Like, all these things are already in place, designed for you, and you just push through the machine and you just function, like going along with it. When you're remote, when you work remotely, nobody's forcing any of these things. You could never brush your teeth, never shower, never change your pajama clothing, never leave your bedroom, never have lunch.
Mhm.
You could have terrible, terrible, terrible habits. You could have like 3 TV stations with all kinds of movies running. Music could be blasting. You could be completely distracted. Nobody would know this. This would be totally up to you. And so when it's up to you, people think freedom, I can do anything, but they don't realize that without discipline, freedom is hell. Like, freedom
Yeah.
means you're going to be the victim of your own moods, if you don't have the discipline to create structure and to follow that structure yourself. So when we try to gauge for maturity, how do we do that today? I know that you, particularly on the culture call that you do with people that we're interviewing, that you ask a couple of questions that really try to get to the heart of the question of like, is this a mature person?
Yeah. And so a lot of those questions, it's just in based on the conversations that we're having, and I get to know more about them as a person and where they're at with their life. And when I'm asking about remote work, I'm also really trying to figure out, um, are you wanting this because of, now you want to pick up and travel and move and go somewhere, and you've got a whole different version of what you think your life is going to look like, or is it actually something that is viable? And just through our conversations, I can pick up pretty well where people are at with their life and if they are going to be successful in this space. And that is something that we cover once you are hired on the first day in these culture calls that I do, where I talk about how the communication, like, it still needs to happen, where you need to ask if you need something, you need to be proactive about that. And so also during interviews, I'm looking for that as well, is making sure people are proactive about communication.
Yeah, there's also like, I mean, this is related to what we said before, but there's a number of questions. Like, even looking at somebody's past, you can you can find these pieces of evidence for somebody that is disciplined and mature, right?
Yeah.
um
How
how
long
much
they've stayed at the job
How long have they
previous.
stayed? Yeah. How long have
Yeah.
they stayed in jobs? What kind of hobbies do they have? What kind of life have they created? Is there anything in there, like somebody that runs marathons every quarter around the world? Like, that needs an incredible amount of discipline, structure, planning, training, and then going and doing it.
Yeah.
People that were in athletics, people that have just displayed that they created lives that require discipline of them. That can be a good signal, right? Um, there's always also like the kind of like the reasons and setup for remote work, right? So what are your reasons for being excited about working at a remote company, or why you have chosen to work remotely for many years already? What is the choice there? Some people go, I don't really care, could also work locally somewhere. It's just the kind of companies and opportunities that I thought were most exciting happen to be remote, and that works for me as well. Some people have other reasons. I've been living in whatever, LA, New York, San Francisco for 10 years and I wanted to move back to my family. I want to take care of my sick mother, or I wanted to change my life to surf more. And so last 2 years I've been surfing a lot more, and I've kind of revamped my life, and I want to do interesting work. There's limited available work that's interesting to me locally. So I'm looking for work remotely while the lifestyle that I choose to have is here locally. Those are very different reasons. And what we mentioned earlier of like I've never traveled abroad and I want to travel and still make income. So remote work seemed like to be a good idea, which this can work as well. Like I'm just saying, these are either positive, either green or red flags, and you as a company have to decide what combination of that works for you. And then the setup, is always an interesting question. How does your work day look like? Do you work from home? Do you have a home office? Do you go to a co-working space? Where do you do your lunches? Do you do workouts? And some people have these amazing life designs where in the mornings they bring the children to school every morning, and they spend like a couple of hours in the morning with the children, and then therefore they work much later in the nights, but they have like this perfect setup where they can be super productive. It's some guest house that they remodel to be the ultimate remote workplace. Just asking some of these questions and hearing what answers people have can give you a great idea for, wow, this person has a great setup, is very thoughtful, and there's very profound and like compelling reasons why they chose this work type, versus other people that just seem the answers that they'll give you are just more random, or they just don't sound that mature. And so there's instantly more risk for you as an employer to give them a job and deal with that maybe thoughtlessness that they displayed during the interviewing process around remote work.
Yeah. I think that's the key, is the thoughtfulness and the intention. And that's what I'm always trying to pick up on in these interviews through various questions, but just having conversation. You can pick up on those things, and they matter. They really do.
They really do. All right. We could talk for hours about like how to find remote fit people and how to gauge for it. But we also want to hear from you. If you hired lots of people remotely, if you learned some questions to ask or not to ask, some tests to do, or some ways to think about this differently, we're always excited to learn more and grow together with the remote community around this. You can always get in touch with Mary@close.com or Stella@close.com. Love to hear from you. Until next time, this is it from us. Boom, the wave.